A quick note before we begin. This episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and a 30-day free trial at theauthorinside.com/freebook. Choose from over 180,000 titles. Go to theauthorinside.com/freebook.
You're listening to the Author Inside You podcast, a weekly podcast designed to motivate you to finish writing a book, choose a publisher, and build an audience. Keep listening if you're looking to get propelled into the next chapter of your life. And now, it's the Author Inside You podcast.
Hello, I'm Matt Rafferty.
And I'm Leah Rafferty.
Joining us today is Kevin Hofmann, an accomplished writer and public speaker who has a passion for adoption, especially transracial adoption. Kevin is the author of Growing Up Black in White. Welcome, Kevin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Kevin, what can you tell us about your childhood?
So it was a very unique childhood. I am the result of an affair between a white woman and black man. In the late 60s, they worked together at one of the plants in the Detroit area. They were happily married, just to two different people.
Okay.
So at my birth mother's white husband's insistence, he insisted that basically she put me up for adoption. So I was immediately put up for adoption, and 3 months later was adopted by a white minister, his wife, and they have 3 children, biological children. So I'm the youngest of 4 in that family. And that's where it begins. I was born 2 weeks after the riots in Detroit. So I'm this biracial. Yeah. So I'm this biracial baby born into really a city that was still burning.
Wow.
And it was a direct result of the fact that the two races that I'm made up of could not get along. And so that's where the story begins.
What an interesting way to begin your life, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then you decided to write a book about it? Is that the...
Yeah, so then probably I had been thinking about it. I was an insurance adjuster, and then I would come home and make notes and think about what I was going to write. Well, back in 2009, I was laid off. And so I had a whole lot of extra time. And so within 6 months, within 6 months of being laid off, I wrote the book, finished the book, and published the book.
Wow, in 6 months?
That's impressive.
Yeah, and it went by quick. And it was just, I've always been a writer. I've always loved to just tell things in my own way, and just thought, wow, what an interesting story that not many people, get to hear about. And so I thought, wow, I think I could teach some lessons about what we did right, what we did wrong, and what we could have done better. It's interesting. One of the things I do besides write is I do a lot of training. So I will train adoptive and foster parents. And one thing I've looked into is, racial identity and how kids, as they develop, how they see race. And what I found, which was shocking to me, was that kids notice race as early as 6 months old.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. And so I just knew. I looked at them. We lived in a suburb of Detroit for the first 3 years of my life. When I was 11 months old, we woke up to a cross burning on our front yard.
Oh. Wow.
And then
As an 11-month-old, your people are upset.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. So someone felt I was a threat at 11 months old.
Right.
Jeez.
And so we lived in that neighborhood 3 years after that. And then finally we moved to Detroit, where my dad, he was an associate pastor at that church. We moved to Detroit. He becomes the head pastor of a church where the parsonage, or the home where we lived, was in a black neighborhood. So, yeah, I was always around kids that looked like me, and so I always knew.
Okay.
I didn't match my family.
Yeah. All right.
And was that difficult in that neighborhood, having white parents?
No, it was great for me because, I got to go out and just see kids that look like me every day. And that's the biggest thing about race that I've learned, is that, my experience and how I experience life has a lot to do with race. And that doesn't make it better than anybody else's viewpoint. It just makes it a different experience. It was comforting for me to be around other kids that were experiencing life as I was. And I could say things simply like, man, I think that guy just treated me badly because I'm black. And all I wanted them to say was, that's a possibility, or you're not crazy. And that's what they would do. They would say, yeah, you're probably right. And then we'd move on with our day.
Wow. All right. So then getting back to writing the book. So you were laid off and you decided to write this book. You did it pretty quickly. And how did you find someone to publish it?
So I had started looking for a publisher, and I kept getting what I call these predator kind of calls where, I was really excited. I was new to the game of being an author. And one guy was like, yeah, we can publish you, and it only costs you this much. And I thought, man, that doesn't sound right. And so then I kept looking into it and finally decided, this is when CreateSpace was around back in 2010, which is the Amazon self-publishing arm of Amazon. And decided to go that route because it was quicker. I had more control. My royalties were better. I have a good friend that I grew up with, known him for the last 40 years. He also wrote a book. He went the straight publisher route. And there's a huge difference between the freedom I have, the freedom he has, how much we make off each book, and just thought that was a way better fit for me.
What do you think the biggest difference is?
I think it is the reputation. And I went into that knowing I don't want anyone to pick up this book and know that it's self-published. And you can do that. There are some books that you can just look at and know. Yeah. And so that's what I really spent a lot of time on was I wanted this to sit along on the shelves of any, regularly published book, and you couldn't tell the difference. And I think I did that. I did it better. I did one edition back in 2010. Went around the country speaking, and everyone kept asking me questions about, the life that I lived, and were asking me very specific questions. Well, if this happens, what do you do? So I decided to go back, did a second edition, changed the whole cover of the book. It's much better now. And then added a chapter that's probably another 40 pages at the end of the book. Yeah.
So is that the biggest difference, you think, from being able to tell a self-published book from a publishing company's book is the cover?
Yeah, that's what really sunk into me was just and especially this is 10 years ago. It seemed like everybody that was self-publishing came out with these really glossy covers, and I could just tell. And so probably the biggest mistake I made writing the book was I should have just broken down and paid a professional editor. I tried to do it. I had my mom do it. And that was another reason why I went back and did the second edition, because there were I had a friend, I was trying to get into a bigger market as to who I could speak to. And so I was trying to get into schools, and there were just simple mistakes that it just wasn't going to work in schools. So
then in the revision, did you hire an editor?
Yeah, I went through their editor, but I just paid, the extra money. I should have done that the first time.
How did you ensure that your book cover was strong enough that it would look like a published book cover?
So I went with the matte finish instead of glossy.
Okay.
That's good.
And then the first cover, I have a friend who's a graphic artist, and he did it. And it was just, again, 10 years ago, the technology wasn't there to do what it can do today. And so it didn't flow right. And so I went to my mom and my wife and said, hey, I should put a picture of myself on the cover when I was little. And it's the picture it's my mom and my wife's favorite picture of me when I was 5 years old. I think it looks better.
Oh, great.
One thing I learned, which I think is huge, is if you're writing a memoir, of course, a memoir is true. It involves other people. To any author that's writing a memoir, understand that people who that are in your book, because they're part of your life, they will do this to a T. They'll get the book and they'll flip through it looking for their name to see where they come in and how they're portrayed. And that has been an issue with me. Like I said, I have a good friend who's also written a memoir, and it was an issue with him because members of our family did that. They went through the book. Like, I had sent the book out. It was done. It was about to go to the publisher on Monday. I sent it out on a Friday to my family and said, it's going. if you got something to say it now.
There's not a lot of time.
Yeah, and my mom calls me early that next morning, and she says, "Well, did you talk to your brother about his experience growing up?" And I said, "Well, it's a memoir, and it's my memoir."
Yeah.
He could write a
So
book.
no. Yeah, that's what I said. I said, yeah, he can write his own book if he wants to put his voice out there. So that was the biggest lesson I learned, is just understand that that's just human nature. People are going to go through your book, see where they are, and see how you portrayed them. And that can go very well, or it can go very badly. And so that was a huge lesson I learned, which was, and I get it more now. Back then I was too close to it, but now I get it, that people just want to protect who they are and how they're seen. And,
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, Kevin, you talked about doing speaking engagements. How did you go about finding speaking engagements after you published the book?
Honestly, it was cold calling people or emailing people. There's a university here, and I was trying to get into, and that was the other thing. A lot of people think that you write the book, you publish the book, and you make all this money. And it just doesn't happen. Like the book for me, and it took me probably 8 years to figure this out, it just gives me street cred to go into different environments and talk.
Okay.
I would just cold call. And I was going, and here was another mistake I made, which was my focus was too narrow. I was just looking at foster care and adoption. And I should have looked at the broader picture that comes with our story, which is race and racism. Mm-hmm. And so then I started marketing towards schools, K through 12, universities. And I said, my slant was, and I did this when I wrote the book. One of the purposes behind the book was I wanted to tell my experience as a person of color in this country and how I experience life every day. And I knew I wanted to do that in a way that people wouldn't be put off or be offended by how I was talking about race. So it was very purposeful how I would talk about that.
Okay.
And that then again allowed for a larger audience. And so this grew from just adoption and foster care to the subject of race and racism and diversity and inclusion. So now I go into K through 12 and universities and organizations, and we talk about diversity and inclusion. And one of the first calls I made was a university here, and I went to the social work department and got the head of the social work department, and was so fortunate. He called me in, I sat down, and they used my book for all freshmen have to go through their school and take a multiculturalism class, which deals with race and racism. And so they took on my book as one of the textbooks for the class.
Excellent. Wow, you must have been very happy.
Yeah, and I would go in once a term to 2 or 3 different classes and get to talk to the kids, and they all read the book, and they'd ask questions. And yeah, it was an amazing experience.
I would think because as an author, you're getting feedback directly from your audience. And then, I would think that you're also finding that, boy, what I wrote really is important.
And that was the other thing that I had, I'm still trying to digest is this thing is so much bigger than you. Mm-hmm. There's a reason why you're here. One of the parts of my story, which actually never made the book because I didn't know about it when I wrote this, but my mother, when she found out she was pregnant, actually went to her sister and asked for money for an abortion and was given that money. Wow. And she had every intention of leaving this mobile home in Taylor, Michigan, to go up to Flint, Michigan to have an abortion, which was an hour drive. And somewhere between Detroit area and Flint, my mother changed her mind, chose to go home and tell her white husband that she was pregnant by a black coworker, and made the decision to have me.
Wow.
And so, that is so much bigger than me. I mean, I was less than an hour away from
not being here.
Abortion.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's what's really sunk home to me is, man, this can speak to so many other people and help in an area which I think, especially in this country, we desperately need help in. And so that's been the mission, is to, be bigger and better.
That is really cool to have that kind of the story that you can share with so many people and make an influence. That is really cool.
Yeah, and that's, I guess, the underlying theme for me when it comes to writing is, and I've always felt like this, is that everyone has a story. Mm-hmm. And so I'm fortunate because, you know, I can write, so I could tell my own story. But I will say, not everyone's an author. You can have this great story, but not know how to present it. Sure. And I think a lot of authors people make that mistake, that I have this great story and I'm going to put it out there. And I learned that it makes a huge difference at what you put out there and how you put it out there.
Well, talking about that, what was the biggest challenge you had to overcome during this process?
Writing a memoir is very emotional and very draining. And it clicked after a while that when I didn't feel like writing, it wasn't writer's block. That was my body saying emotionally I needed to take a break.
Sure.
And so I honor that more now. But it's been a great experience for me. And again, everyone has a story. And what this has done for me, which has been amazing, is I've gotten to go all over the country and talk about this story. And it's actually, it's free therapy. Actually, I get paid
Great,
to talk about this stuff and work it out. And that's an amazing experience where I learned so much and I've healed so much over the years from just telling the story and people asking me questions and me thinking about what they're asking and then answering. I am a trainer for the state of Ohio. So I train all over the state of Ohio in foster care and adoption. The doors really started open probably 2 or 3 years ago when I decided, okay, let's really push this. A lot of colleges have what's called first year experience, where they bring all the freshmen in, they all read one book, and then they bring the author in to discuss the book, ask questions, sign the books. 2 years ago, I thought, wow, that would be a great avenue.
Yeah.
And then understood at that point, man, my focus was in foster care and adoption. And I didn't realize that you're dealing mostly with nonprofit organizations or state-run organizations that don't have any money. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they wanted me to come speak, but they would get me the first couple of years, which was, hey, come speak and we'll give you a chance to sell books. So I traveled across the country to sell 5 books, and it just wasn't worth it anymore.
Sure,
right.
Sure.
So yeah, one of the biggest lessons I learned was to say no.
So is it possible to go full-time and do speaking as an author?
It is tough. You've got to really work as many angles as you can. So, you know, I've added organizations, K through 12, colleges and universities, and I still do adoption and foster care. I'm still an adjuster, during the day.
Okay.
It's good extra money.
Right, but it's not paying the bills.
No, but I'm working my way towards those bigger paydays. And I think that unfortunately, you just have to, pay your dues.
Sure. Maybe not monetarily, but your experiences are out of this world.
Yes, and quite honestly, it just feels like, man, and just one break away from really opening this up.
The Author Inside You podcast is brought to you by
Scribble File. You can find it at scribophle.com. It's a fantastic writing community where writers of all genres come together to support and critique each other's work.
There are writer groups where you'll find like-minded writers, or you can even start your own writing group. Or there are forums where you can meet other members to discuss all things writings, ask for and give help, or talk about life in general.
Another great aspect of Scribble File is that you can send private messages within the web page. So say you join a writers group and you become friends with some of the writers within the group, you can actually send private messages back and forth and not have to do it via email. So other members can learn more about you, what your style is like, and gain some fans.
With all the wonderful resources on scribblefile.com, now is the time to make your book a reality. There is no reason not to start writing your book.
So if you're looking for a beta reader or some like-minded writers, check out scribblefile.com. What kind of advice would you give somebody who's working on a memoir?
Listen to what your body's telling you. There's a reason why you may not feel like writing today, and it may be because yesterday was a very emotional day, and it's going to take you time to process it. Understand, writing a memoir doesn't only affect you, it affects everybody else that's in that memoir. And just understand that you're going to be really excited about publishing this, but someone might not be too excited about how you've portrayed them.
So tell us a bit about the writing process of your book.
So this is interesting. So I said, okay, I'm going to write the book. So I called my mom and dad up and said, hey, I'd like to come interview you, and I want to hear, your side of the story. And that was when I was told about the cross burning incident. I didn't know that until then.
Okay.
And so then for me, I was like, well, that's where the book starts. And so the book does open up to that scene. But it was interviewing my mom and dad. It was interviewing my mom's mom, who had a real difficult time with, bringing this child of color into her family. And I didn't interview any other family members because really this was a story about our family, but it had to do a lot more with me, my relationship with my mom and dad, and other people. So I didn't interview siblings.
Well, Kevin, what's the biggest piece of advice that anybody gave you about writing a book?
That was the frustrating thing. I reached out to several authors who would never, and I wasn't reaching out to like Stephen King. These were like just local people.
And they didn't help?
Nobody would give me any help.
Oh, geez, that's certainly disheartening.
Yeah, it was. And so anytime someone asked me for help, I'm very open to giving them help.
Wow, that just made my heart sink. That's crazy.
Yeah, I was just cold calling people, and I was sticking with local people because I thought, okay,
sure,
we got that local connection. But I never got any response.
Well, Kevin, 2 last questions. Where can we purchase your book, and how can people reach out and get in touch with you?
So my website is my name, Kevin Hofmann, Hofmann. So if you just go to kevinhoffman.com, you can buy the book. There's T-shirts that I made that have to do with diversity and inclusion that are on that website. There's examples of me speaking and the different things that I do. The book is also available on Amazon Kindle, and I just finished the Audible version late last year.
Wait. Well, you had to tell us about producing that. How did that go?
Interesting. So it was just, I called a guy up at a sound studio in Toledo and said, hey, would you record me? And he had done 1 or 2 other books. And so I went over a period of probably 3 or 4 weeks. And I think each time I would go in and read 3 or 4 chapters. And then he put it all together. And there's certain requirements that Audible has as far as sound and all those technical things. Fortunately, the guy that produced it, he took care of all that for me.
And has it been worth it?
Yeah, it has. It was really, so here's the interesting part of reading that was I really struggled early on in the book reading it because I'm talking about life before I remembered it. And so I'm talking about that cross burning in the yard, but I was 11 months old, so I didn't remember that. So my life before I remembered it was much harder to read.
Interesting.
Once I got into probably 4 or 5 when I had vivid memories, then you see my personality come out. It's just a whole different change, which I never thought about. But yeah, those chapters where I really wasn't involved, people were telling me what was happening, they were harder to read for me. They're harder to read with emotion and just, just to put some personality into it.
Well, thank you, Kevin, for taking the time to speak with us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Most podcast apps have a subscribe button. And if you haven't subscribed to our podcast yet, we'd really appreciate it if you'd click that button today.
Until next time.
Right on.
Thank you for listening to the Author Inside You podcast with your host, Leah and Matt Rafferty.